Hi, my name's Marie, and last week my own family laughed at me in public. I still feel the sharp sting of humiliation burning in my chest when I think about that luxury car showroom. Not behind closed doors or during a heated argument, but right there where everyone could witness it. They told the salesman I was too cheap to belong there. My mother handed me a rag to wipe down a Ferrari, like I was hired help. And my sister whispered, "At least now we look generous." Their mockery cut straight through me. I felt my existence completely erased by their casual cruelty. Then they had security escort me out like an unwelcome stranger. What they failed to realize was that I hadn't come alone. And the man who pulled up next didn't need to raise his voice to change everything. Before I continue my story, I'm curious. What time are you listening to this and where from? This isn't just about wealth or status symbols. It's about the quiet, calculated betrayal, the silent revenge that followed, and how they thought I was invisible until it was far too late for them to make amends. I can still hear my mother's deceptively sweet voice when she called that morning. "Marie," she said over the phone, her words dripping with false warmth. "Victoria's thinking of getting a new car. Want to come with us to the dealership? Could be fun." It wasn't really a question. I paused long enough for her to notice my hesitation, my stomach already knotting with dread, but not long enough to admit how much I despised these outings. For most of my life, I've existed as an afterthought in my family. When I wasn't completely invisible, I was merely useful to them. Still, I agreed to go because that's what daughters do when they're desperately holding on to the last fraying thread of what family once meant. The next morning, I stood in the Boston showroom parking lot next to Victoria in her gold-tinted designer sunglasses and Louis Vuitton heels while I self-consciously adjusted the worn strap of my faded canvas bag. I'd chosen simple jeans and a grey cardigan that suddenly felt woefully inadequate. The morning air was chilly against my skin, but it couldn't match the coldness spreading through my chest. As soon as we walked through those gleaming glass doors, I felt myself disappear. The showroom sparkled with polished chrome and expensive hushed conversations. My parents strutted in like they owned the place, shoulders back, chins high. My sister smiled with practiced charm like she belonged in this world of luxury. Salesmen practically tripped over themselves greeting them, eyes bright with the promise of commission. No one looked at me. No one asked if I needed anything. No one even acknowledged my presence. My mother didn't bother to introduce me. Gregory wandered toward a Porsche as if he already knew what Victoria would choose. I carefully followed behind them, my body tense with anxiety, trying not to bump into anything that looked more expensive than my last 4 paychecks combined. Victoria pointed at a bright red coupe, laughed that practice laugh of hers, and then motioned for one of the salesmen to follow her with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is more my style," she chirped, and everyone nodded as if she'd said something incredibly profound. I stood beside a sleek dark blue model tucked in the back corner. It was understated and elegant, the kind of car someone would drive if they didn't need to broadcast their importance to the world. My heart connected with it instantly. That's when Gregory approached me. "Hey, sweetheart, can you do me a quick favor?" he said casually, his voice smooth as he handed me a thin stack of papers. "Just a formality. Since you're already here, might as well help us get the financing started." I blinked in confusion, my legal training immediately kicking in. "What is this showroom paperwork?" He shrugged dismissively. "No big deal." He tapped where my name was already printed. Already printed. My stomach dropped as I looked up. Victoria was watching from across the room, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, her eyes cold and calculating, but she didn't say a word. Gregory patted my shoulder just once. "You've always been the responsible one." I don't know why I signed. Maybe out of habit. Maybe from emotional exhaustion. Maybe it was the part of me that still desperately wanted to be useful, to be valued. But there was the dealership name at the top, the loan language circled in blue pen, and my name, my full legal name, appeared 3 different times throughout the document. When I handed it back, Victoria had already turned away, dismissing me completely. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked down and saw a notification from our family group chat, except it wasn't meant for me. I could tell by how the message was worded, a screenshot sent by mistake. "Let her come. Her face makes us look generous." Beneath that, 3 laughing emojis. Then, "Don't worry, she still thinks she matters." I didn't flinch or cry, though my chest tightened painfully. I just stared at the screen, a cold numbness spreading through me. Across the room, Diane was complimenting the stitching on a car seat, her voice carrying with practiced charm. Gregory chuckled at something Victoria had said, his pride obvious. The salesman laughed too, though I doubt he understood the joke. And me? I just stood there holding my phone like it had physically wounded me. I should have walked over and confronted them. I should have raised my voice. I should have thrown my phone at them and demanded respect. But I didn't do any of that. I locked my screen, slipped the phone into my back pocket and looked around that showroom like I was seeing it for the first time. Not the cars, but the reflection of who I truly was to them. I walked toward the exit without saying a word, my heart pounding in my ears. Outside, the sunlight hit my face with sharp indifference. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me, feeling exposed. My shoes echoed against the pavement with each step. I didn't look back because in that moment I knew something fundamental had changed. Not in them, but in me. I shouldn't have come, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling slightly. But maybe I needed to. Maybe sometimes you have to be completely erased to finally see the outline of your own worth. I didn't make it to the parking lot. My feet had taken me toward the exit, yes. But something in my chest couldn't follow through. A mixture of hurt, anger, and curiosity kept me rooted. I reached the sidewalk, took one deep breath, then another, and instead of heading to the street, I turned and circled the building slowly. I kept close to the wall, feeling like an intruder trying not to be noticed. Back near the valet entrance, I slipped in behind a delivery driver unloading cases of bottled water. No one looked twice at me. I moved down the side hallway until I found myself tucked near the service lounge, half shielded by a marble column but with a clear view of the main floor, my heart racing uncomfortably. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe I needed to see them one more time. Not just how they looked, but who they truly became when they thought I wasn't watching, when they didn't have to maintain the facade. They were still by the Ferraris. Victoria was beaming, one hand perched on her hip like she was posing for a photo no one had asked for. Diane had taken off her jacket and was chatting with a couple by the coffee machine like she belonged to their social club. And Gregory was laughing, animated, telling some story loud enough to be overheard, his hands gesturing grandly. I stood still, a shadow in my own family's story. That's when Victoria noticed me. She tilted her head, gave that rehearsed pageant smile that never reached her eyes, and strolled toward me. In her hand was a bright yellow microfiber cloth. "Oh, hey," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false affection. "Since you're already here," she handed me the cloth, her fingers barely touching mine. "You missed a spot," she added, nodding toward a crimson Ferrari behind me. "Might as well make yourself useful." A salesman chuckled. Gregory smirked. "And Diane?" My mother laughed genuinely, the sound piercing my heart. "Oh, stop," she said, waving one hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a joke." "A joke?" I felt my face flush with humiliation. Customers looked over. One woman smirked. Another whispered something to her husband, who didn't even try to hide his grin. My embarrassment was their entertainment. I stared at the cloth in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have, like a symbol of my place in their world, like a test of my worth. I walked to the car, looked at my reflection in the gleaming red surface, wiped once, slow and deliberate. Then I placed the cloth on the hood and turned back without a word, my dignity barely intact. Victoria had already moved on, flipping her perfectly styled hair and sashaying toward a man in a charcoal suit. I stayed near the edge of the room, feeling like I was disappearing. The noise faded around me. Time stretched and twisted until all I could hear were fragments of voices overlapping, cutting through my consciousness. She's got real taste, this one. Victoria, right? She's expanding her brand next quarter. Probably going national. And then came Diane's voice. Clear and thoughtless, Victoria's always been the one with presence. Not like you-know-who. Some women just look like they settled, no offense. She didn't whisper it. She didn't glance around first. She didn't care that I was standing 3 steps behind her, hearing every cutting word. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. But inside, something cracked open painfully, and this time the wound didn't seal itself back up like before. My eyes drifted toward the cars again. A white Audi parked next to the Ferrari. 3 years ago, Victoria couldn't make the final down payment. I'd quietly transferred $5,000 to her account the night before the deadline, money I'd been saving for months. She'd cried on the phone, called me a lifesaver, promised to remember it forever. Not one word of that lived in the stories she told now. No one remembered. No one ever had. They praised her growth, her poise, her vision right there in front of the car she once needed my help to keep. The irony burned in my chest. I backed away from the scene and found a quiet spot near the corner window next to a table of old magazines and untouched cappuccinos. I leaned against the cool glass, staring out at the sky that had turned a soft, indifferent grey. I thought about the texts, the rag, the laughter. I thought about how many times I'd stood in the background hoping they'd turn around and finally see me. And now I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I didn't want their attention or approval. I wanted my peace. I wasn't going to beg for space in a room I helped build with my own sacrifices. I rested my palm on the cool glass, closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a quiet resolve building. "This is the last time I show up where I'm not welcome," I whispered. And this time I meant every word with absolute certainty. I lingered under the overhang outside the showroom's side entrance, arms crossed tightly against my chest, watching sunlight brush the tops of parked cars. My emotions churned beneath my composed exterior. If they'd meant to cut me out, they'd succeeded brilliantly. But something told me not to walk away. Not yet. I doubled back, retracing a discreet path through the back valet entrance. My steps were slower this time, measured and purposeful. Inside, I took a seat near a brochure display, far enough from the crowd to disappear again, but close enough to hear everything, my legal training making me alert to details. That's when I caught Gregory's voice. Calm, charming, rehearsed. "We've been supporting this dealership for years," he told the manager with practiced confidence. "It's a tradition in our family, investing locally, keeping business flowing." Victoria stood beside him, chin lifted, nodding along like she was born into power instead of borrowing it. My jaw clenched painfully. I remembered the time I co-signed a lease under my name because their credit wasn't sufficient. I remembered the years I worked 2 jobs while Victoria studied lifestyle branding and bought designer handbags she called investment pieces. But sure, tradition. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. I had just turned to leave when Gregory stepped toward me, fishing something from the inside pocket of his tailored blazer. He held out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the corners. "You remember this?" he asked. His voice was light, like this was a fond memory we shared. I hesitated, my fingers trembling slightly, then unfolded it slowly. A tuition payment receipt. 38,000, paid in full. My name in block letters at the top. My stomach dropped. "That's what we paid for your law degree," he said, then leaned in slightly, his cologne too strong. "We never asked for anything back, but gratitude's not so hard, is it?" I stared at the ink, at the numbers, and I understood with painful clarity. This wasn't a reminder. It was a receipt for a debt they believed I still owed. Every word behind his smile said the same thing: "You're lucky we let you sit at the table." I folded the paper and handed it back, my voice steady despite the anger burning inside me. "No worries," I said quietly. "I've paid it 1,000 times over." He didn't respond, just smiled like I hadn't spoken. That's when the tension hit a new kind of sharp, cutting through my composure. I turned toward the side exit. I was done, ready to walk away before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. But as I stepped forward, a man in a grey blazer blocked my path, his presence intimidating. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said carefully, clipboard in hand. "I've been asked to escort you off the floor." I blinked, taken aback. "Why?" My voice came out stronger than I expected. He glanced at the clipboard. "We're not sure what your relationship is with the party inside. For security reasons, we need to clear non-buyer visitors." I blinked again, not sure I'd heard him right, feeling a flush of anger and humiliation. "My name is on the application," I said evenly. "I'm family." He paused, hesitated, then looked to the side, and a uniformed security guard was already approaching, making my heart race. I didn't fight it, didn't raise my voice, but I looked him straight in the eye, channeling every ounce of my courtroom confidence. "Are you escorting them too?" I asked, tilting my head toward my family, still laughing by the Ferrari. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I nodded once, brushed past both men and walked to the exit. Not fast, but slow and deliberate, my dignity intact despite the humiliation burning through me. From the corner of my eye, I caught Nathan, the younger salesman who'd offered me water earlier, watching with concern in his eyes. He mouthed something as I passed. I think it was, "I'm sorry," but no one said it out loud. No one intervened. Outside, the sun had shifted slightly, casting long shadows across the lot. I stood by the valet railing, hands resting on the cold metal bar. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. They were trying to erase me from the showroom, from the story. But the thing about erasure, sometimes it just makes space for something louder. And I was ready to speak, ready to be heard. They expected me to disappear quietly, humiliated and small. Instead, I stayed right there. I didn't pace nervously. I didn't flinch. I leaned against a short concrete pillar near the valet loop, letting the late afternoon sun warm my shoulders, a strange calm settling over me. From that angle, I could still see them through the glossy showroom windows, smiling for photos, clinking their water bottles like they'd won something. They hadn't, not yet. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve and felt something cool brush against my skin. I looked down. The bracelet. It had been so long since I thought of it as anything more than an accessory. A thin silver band with an almost invisible inscription inside. Thomas had given it to me before our 3rd anniversary. I remember the way he said it quietly in the kitchen while I was halfway through organizing legal briefs. "You don't have to prove your worth," he told me, his eyes sincere. "But I know you'll keep trying anyway." Back then, I laughed, shrugged it off, uncomfortable with the truth of it. Today, those words felt like lifelines pulling me from drowning. I turned the bracelet slowly on my wrist and ran my thumb across the inside. There it was, still faint, but etched permanently. "You don't have to prove your worth." Not here. Not anymore. That tiny message wrapped around my wrist like armor was the only voice I needed in that moment. Inside, Victoria raised a champagne flute like she was hosting a gala, not just test driving a car. Diane stood next to her, eyes glowing with approval, like she'd finally shaped Victoria into the presentable daughter she always wanted. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to throw her own sister under the bus to maintain an illusion. I watched my reflection in the showroom glass. I didn't look like them. Not in the designer heels or polished curls or fake affection for strangers who mispronounced our last name. But I looked real. I looked like someone who'd finally woken up from a lifelong trance. Footsteps approached slowly from the side. I didn't turn around. "Hey," a voice said, soft but clear. "Mind if I stand here?" It was Nathan, the younger salesman. I recognized the lanyard still hanging from his neck, but he had taken off his jacket like he'd clocked out early. He didn't say much, just stood beside me, both of us looking forward like we were watching a street performance neither of us understood. "I saw what happened," he said after a moment, his voice low with genuine concern. "Back there, that wasn't right." I stayed quiet, afraid my voice might break. "I don't know your story," he continued, sincerity in his words. "But I think you should know. People noticed." I glanced at him. He wasn't looking at me, just staring out at the street like it held answers. "You handled it better than I would have," he added, hands stuffed into his pockets. "Most folks would have shouted, caused a scene. You just walked away with such dignity." "Walking away is not weakness," I said, more to myself than him. My voice steadier than I felt. He nodded slowly. "No, it's knowing when they're not worth your words." There was silence between us, thick but not uncomfortable. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Your silence?" It hit harder than anything they said. For a second, I wasn't in the showroom anymore. I was 10 years old, hiding behind the pantry door as Victoria threw a tantrum over not being allowed to wear makeup. Diane had scolded her gently, then turned and snapped at me for eavesdropping. "You're always lurking, Marie," she'd said. Always waiting to be offended. But I wasn't waiting now. I'd been pushed far enough to know this wasn't just taking offense. It was recognizing a painful truth. Nathan looked down at my wrist. "That's a nice bracelet," he said. I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth for the first time that day. "It is," I replied. "Doesn't match the outfit, but it matches the moment perfectly." He gave a soft chuckle. "Fair enough." We stood for a few more minutes, not saying anything. Then I took a step toward the parking lot, not to drive away, but just to shift the weight on my feet. Nathan didn't follow. "I hope they realize what they lost," he said. "They won't," I answered, my voice calm with certainty. "But I will." And with that, I walked toward my car, shoulders back, head high. I didn't start the engine. I just opened the door, tossed my bag inside, and sat down, window rolled halfway because I wasn't leaving yet. Not until I saw the look on their faces when the next surprise pulled up. I didn't need to look back to feel it, the showroom door closing behind me. Not with a bang, but with a soft click that carried more finality than any slam could. But just as I reached my car, a well-dressed man in his mid-30s stepped out from the side entrance. He wasn't Nathan. No warmth, no hesitation, just cold professionalism. His badge read Finance Liaison. He approached with a clipboard tucked against his side like a verdict waiting to be handed down. "Ms. Winters," he said, measured but polite. I turned. "Yes?" My voice remained steady despite the anger simmering beneath. If I may have a moment, just some paperwork needing finalization. It's about the co-signer amendment. Your parents asked to update the documents. Victoria will be the sole applicant moving forward. I blinked, my legal mind immediately registering the implications. Wait, what? He gave a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Standard adjustment, I'm told. Internal request. Shouldn't take more than a second. I stepped closer, using every inch of my professional presence. I'm the one who signed the original documents. I co-signed that application this morning. He hesitated, uncomfortable under my gaze. That version was replaced. I believe you've been removed. Removed? Just like that. The words struck me like a physical blow. I followed him back through the side hall, past the espresso bar and promotional posters. The same space I'd walked through hours earlier. Except now something in the air had shifted. My own name didn't belong anymore. I'd been erased. In the lounge area, I sat across from the new stack of paperwork he handed me. Unspoken pressure pushing down on my shoulders like a tangible weight. I reached for the top sheet, my fingers slightly trembling. There it was. Victoria's name in bold-centered clean. No trace of mine. I flipped the next page. All blank signature lines except hers. She'll be handling the financing solo, he clarified like he was offering some kind of prize. It's actually more efficient this way. I didn't respond. I just set the papers down, my legal training screaming about the ethical violations taking place. Murray, Diane's voice drifted over as she passed through. You always said you didn't care about credit, so this shouldn't bother you, right? She didn't stop walking. She didn't even turn to look at me. Her casual cruelty cut deep. It wasn't just exclusion anymore. This was a razor-sharp deletion of my existence. I stood up slowly. The room was quiet, but every sound felt amplified in my heightened state, the hiss of a cappuccino machine, the tap-tap of someone's acrylic nails on their phone screen, the low hum of fake laughter behind glass, and then the second blow landed. Another manager, older, crisp suit, firm walk, approached with a kind of forced composure I'd seen used on shoplifters and lost tourists. Ma'am, he said with a businesslike tone, we've been asked to kindly have you step outside the lounge. You're not on the purchasing profile, and the sales floor is getting busier. I stared at him, feeling the heat of humiliation rise in my face. Is there a reason? I asked, not moving an inch. We just want to maintain a certain atmosphere for our clients, he said, his implication clear. I felt the corners of my mouth tighten, my professional mask slipping. For your real clients, you mean? He didn't answer, just stood with a clipped professionalism, giving me time to choose dignity over disruption. So I walked again. Only this time there was no pretense left, no more politeness in my silence, just a burning determination. The valet circle was quieter now. The sun had dropped lower, stretching shadows across the pavement. I found a wide concrete planter by the hedge and sat, cool stone against the back of my legs, quiet, except for the occasional burst of laughter from inside that felt like salt in my wounds. I sat still for a second. I wondered if this was the smarter move to just let it all go. Let them win this one. Save myself the bruises. Wasn't that what peace looked like? Maybe peace meant not needing to be right. Maybe maturity was walking away without needing the last word. Maybe silence was strength. But then my phone buzzed. A notification from the family group chat. I opened it knowing I shouldn't, my heart racing. A photo had just been uploaded. Victoria posing beside the red convertible with both of our parents smiling proudly at her sides. The caption read, "Good things come to those who deserve it." I didn't feel rage or even grief. I felt done. Without flinching, I deleted the entire thread. Years of messages, birthdays, reminders, check-ins, fake apologies. Gone. Not because I was angry, but because I was done cataloguing a life where I only ever showed up to prove I didn't need a seat at their table. I put my phone down and looked out over the street, quiet and dusky now. And I stayed. No plans, no speeches, no grand revenge yet. Just the beginning of a different kind of presence. One they wouldn't see coming because they never really saw me at all. I hadn't moved from the planter. The light had softened around me, tinting the pavement with a golden wash. The showroom glass still reflected my family's laughter. Victoria's voice floated through faintly when the door opened to let a couple out. A flash of her rehearsed laugh pierced the air. Then it closed again, leaving me in blessed silence. Like a scene looping inside a snow globe I no longer lived in. But outside I had space, no one looking through me. No one asking for my signature, my silence, my seat in the shadows. I felt myself breathing more freely. Then I heard it before I saw it. The low velvety hum of an engine so smooth it didn't growl. It announced itself with the kind of sound that didn't have to prove anything. My heart quickened. The valet line shifted. Even from where I sat, I could see heads turn with interest. And then it pulled into view, commanding attention. A sleek Tesla Model S plaid midnight blue, clean enough to swallow the sky. The chrome accents didn't just gleam, they made a statement. The car rolled up with the unbothered confidence of someone who knows they're never asked to explain their worth. My stomach fluttered with anticipation. My sister, visible now behind the glass wall, froze mid-gesture. Her fingers, always fluttering when she spoke, dropped suddenly. Diane stood beside her, confusion tightening around her mouth. I felt a rush of satisfaction seeing their expressions change. I stood up, brushing off my jeans, not in preparation, but in quiet recognition. I didn't smile, not even a twitch. I just stood and waited, my heart pounding. The driver door opened slowly, and there he was. Thomas. Tailored suit, steady gait, face unreadable but not cold. Not this time. He rounded the car, buttoning his jacket with one fluid motion, exuding quiet confidence. I didn't expect a speech. He never gave those. When he reached the passenger door, he opened it like it was a ceremony, his eyes finding mine. "Ready?" he asked. That was all. That was enough. I stepped in, feeling a surge of emotion. Victoria had pressed herself to the glass now, hand flattening against it like a child staring at something she couldn't name. Diane tilted forward as if leaning closer would make sense of what she was seeing. Gregory was already on the phone, mouth tight, pacing like something had slipped loose from his control. No one came outside. No one stopped the car. Thomas didn't glance at them. He didn't nod, didn't wave. He just closed the door after I settled in. Walked around and slid behind the wheel. He drove slowly, no rush, no need to flee. The silence between us was clean and comfortable. As we pulled out of the circle, I caught Nathan at the edge of the lot. He didn't smile, just gave a nod, barely a movement, but enough to acknowledge what had happened. I leaned back against the soft leather seat. Inside the showroom, every face was turned our way, but no one opened a door and no one stepped forward. It was already too late for them. The road smoothed out under us. Boston's lights blurred past the windows. I didn't speak, neither did Thomas. He didn't need to ask how it went, and I didn't need to explain why I hadn't called him. Sometimes the people who know your silences are the only ones who deserve to hear your truths. I stared out the window as the world softened into dusk. It wasn't revenge I'd needed, not drama, not spectacle. Just proof quiet, irrefutable, that I'd never been invisible and never would be again. For the first time that day, I felt myself smile. By the time I got home that night, I already knew Victoria wouldn't let the silence last. She never could stand not having the final word. I didn't check my phone until morning, but the notifications had bloomed like weeds overnight. Hundreds of them tangled with tags, group texts, Instagram mentions, and forwarded screenshots from mutual friends I hadn't heard from in years. Her post was long, just long enough to be vague, but calculated a filtered photo of her standing alone next to the car, glossy lips, chin slightly lifted. The caption, "Hard work pays off," even when others try to ride your name in someone else's wallet. Then came the stories. A few slides hinting that a certain person had twisted facts for sympathy and disrupted an important family milestone. No names, of course. She'd never say my name, not even to defame me directly. That would be giving me too much credit. But the comments didn't need clarity. I always knew something was off about her. Some people are allergic to not being the center. Girl, you handled that with such grace. Victoria didn't just lie. She made herself the hero of my restraint. My stomach churned with disgust. I didn't reply. Not then. Instead, I poured coffee, fed the dog, and opened my laptop. I already knew what needed to happen. Not because I wanted to be vindictive, but because she wasn't done yet. And as a lawyer, I knew the importance of evidence. Just before noon, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I picked up, my professional voice automatically engaging. "Ms. Winters?" a man asked. "Yes." I kept my tone neutral. "This is Jonathan Kim, one of the co-owners at the Beach and Crest Auto Group." I was hoping we could talk briefly. His tone was careful, like he was walking across thin ice. I could hear the concern in his voice. "I understand there was some confusion during your recent visit. Is that what we're calling it now?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. He chuckled softly. "Fair point. I just got off a call with someone who made certain claims. That you were emotionally unstable, that you created a scene. There was even a mention of potential legal threats. I let the silence hang then, my legal training taking over. And you believed her? I didn't say that. I said I heard it. His clarification was telling. I nodded though he couldn't see me. Would you like to see what I brought with me that day? Actually, he said quickly, I was about to ask if you'd be willing to meet this afternoon in person, just you and me. I'll be there in an hour. My decision was instant. The meeting took place in a private lounge off the main dealership floor. No cameras, no marketing banners, just 2 chairs, a small glass table and a pitcher of water. Professional and discreet, he was already seated when I walked in. Tie loosened slightly, brows furrowed with fatigue or hesitation. I couldn't tell which, but I could read the concern on his face. I didn't sit right away. I placed the folder on the table, my movements deliberate. He looked at it like it might bite. First, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. My original co-signature on the purchase document, including timestamps. I slid it forward, watching his eyes widen. Second, text messages from my sister and mother asking me to sign just for convenience, not because I was actually part of the purchase. I offered another set of papers, my evidence meticulously organized. Third, screenshots from our family group chat, including the one where I was called a useful liability. His face twitched with discomfort. And finally, I said, pulling out my phone, an audio recording from the lounge area about 10 minutes before I was asked to leave. I tapped play. Victoria's voice filled the room, clear and sharp. She thinks she's involved. She's just here to make us look generous. Trust me, she's too used to being invisible to fight back. I stopped the audio, looked up. Jonathan's hands were folded tightly on the table, his discomfort evident. She said all that in your building, I added. On a day when she was representing your brand. He cleared his throat. I appreciate the clarity. No lawsuits, I said flatly. No public statements unless she keeps pushing. I'm not here to make trouble, but I'm also not here to be her footnote. He nodded slowly. Understood. And if I were you, I added, I'd rethink who gets to represent your image. That evening, I didn't post a lengthy paragraph. I didn't rant or explain or hint. I uploaded one picture standing beside the Tesla. No filters, no pose, just me in jeans, hands by my side, eyes steady with quiet confidence. The next slide, a scanned copy of the original financing agreement. My name, my contribution, stamped and signed. Caption, silence is power, but truth is oxygen. I didn't refresh the comments obsessively. I didn't check who reposted. I didn't need to because 15 minutes later, the family group chat, which had been curiously silent all day, lit up again. A single message from Nathan. That was the quietest takedown I've ever seen. You earned every second. By sunrise, the fire Victoria started was already burning down. I didn't have to throw gasoline. The truth had a way of catching its own wind, spreading where it needed to go. Still, just before noon, Gregory called. Your mother and I think it's time to clear the air. He said like it was a weather report, his tone falsely casual. Family dinner tonight, 600, Bellamar. He didn't ask, he expected compliance. I could have declined. I should have, but something told me the storm hadn't passed. It had only changed direction. So I went, and this time I didn't show up in jeans. I wore a cobalt blue dress that fit like I'd been saving it for this moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to remind the room I hadn't disappeared. I felt powerful walking in. When I walked into the restaurant, heads turned. Not because of the dress or the heels, or the way my hair fell to one side, but because for once Victoria wasn't the first person anyone noticed. I felt their eyes on me and stood taller. She was already seated, of course, at the center of the table, laughing too loud, sipping from a glass of wine like it was a trophy. Gregory and Diane sat across from her, their posture tight, nervous smiles thin and cracked. When I pulled out my chair, the conversation stalled abruptly. And I felt it, that shifting air, the silence that followed a new presence. Not the kind that demanded space, but the kind that changed the shape of the room entirely. Dinner started with tight-lipped questions and thinner answers. Tension thick in the air. How's your week been? Busy. I didn't elaborate. How's Thomas? He's good. Traveling less these days. Small talk floated between us. Hollow and fragile like china cups set on an already tilting table ready to crash down. Halfway through the sea bass, my phone buzzed beside my plate. It was an email forwarded from Thomas. Subject contract withdrawal confirmation. I opened it with 2 taps and there it was. His message to the Beach and Crest dealership board, due to public reputation concerns and ethical alignment with our values. We are formally suspending the corporate acquisition for the Q3 luxury fleet order, 3.2 million, effective immediately. I didn't look up right away, but I didn't have to. I could feel the shift in energy. Victoria's voice cracked first. What? Her composure slipped. Gregory leaned forward, suddenly alert. What did you just see? I turned my screen toward them, held it steady. Their faces changed in an instant. Diane's lips pressed together in a thin line. You didn't have to go that far, she muttered, her voice tight with anger. I tilted my head, feeling strangely calm. Far? I didn't go far. I just stopped being quiet. The silverware clinked against half-finished plates. A waiter passed, then retreated quickly, sensing the tension. Victoria's hands trembled visibly on the tablecloth. You've always needed to win, she hissed, her facade cracking. Even as a kid, you couldn't just let me have one thing. Not even this. I met her eyes, calm, clear, my voice steady. You mean the showroom I helped you fund? The tuition bills I quietly paid when Mom and Dad forgot your scholarship didn't cover summer classes? Or do you mean the silence I gave you every time you called me a side character in my own life? Her jaw locked. Gregory looked like he might stand, might defend her as always. No one did. Not even her. For the first time, no one defended her. The silence was deafening. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth spoke loudly enough. I excused myself after dessert, didn't wait for awkward goodbyes, didn't leave my coat behind for an excuse to return. I walked out with my head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. On the drive home, the city lights blurred into long streaks of colour. My hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts quieter than I expected, a strange peace settling over me. When I got home, there was a single envelope slipped under the door. I bent to pick it up, curious. No stamp, no return address, just my name in soft ink. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board of our community. They'd seen the recent public fallout, the Instagram stories, the reposts. The contract screenshots and the final paragraph read, "Given the misalignment with community values and integrity standards, we're removing Victoria Winters from our sponsored public events and marketing placements. If you are open to partnership opportunities, we would welcome your presence in future initiatives." I read it twice, then once more. Not because I needed validation, but because for the first time it was offered freely. No strings, no guilt trips, no quiet debts disguised as favors, just genuine acknowledgement of my worth. Later that night, I stepped into the bedroom and placed the silver bracelet on my dresser. I didn't need it today. I hadn't touched it once, but I wasn't putting it away. It was part of the woman who walked out of that showroom. And that woman, she was never walking back in the same way again. I smiled at my reflection, seeing strength where I once saw only obligation. The next morning came quietly, as if the world itself had decided not to interfere. Sunlight drifted through the kitchen window in long golden streaks. It warmed the marble counter, the small ceramic mug in my hands, and the corner of the garden I could see from the back porch. Thomas sat at the table reading the paper, his glasses pushed low on his nose. There was no article about Victoria, no headline scandal, just a business brief on market shifts and community updates. Peace disguised in print. I stirred a little honey into my tea and walked barefoot to the small patch of green I'd planted last spring. Lavender, rosemary, a few geraniums that had no business blooming this late in the season, but did anyway. No buzzing from my phone, no calls, no apologies, and surprisingly, I didn't miss them. I felt complete without them. For years, I thought reconciliation meant hearing the words, "I'm sorry." But peace, I was learning, had very little to do with anyone else's timing, and everything to do with mine. I felt it settling into my bones. I set the watering can down and leaned against the garden post, letting the warmth of the mug seep through my fingers. It felt earned, not given, not begged for, earned with every silent dignity I'd maintained. My mind wandered to the showroom, the sharp smell of new leather, the artificial light that made even betrayal look polished. I remembered the way Victoria smiled when she handed me that rag. You missed a spot, and how Diane chuckled. Don't be dramatic. It's just a joke. I remembered the sting not just of that moment, but of every time before that. The quiet comments, the erasures. You've never had presence. You're too quiet for leadership. You never really wanted much, did you? They said those things like compliments, and I accepted them like terms until I didn't, until I found my voice. But more than the sting, I remembered Nathan. his voice soft with genuine concern. If it were me, he'd said, I'd want someone to tell me. Your silence was louder than anything they said. That stuck with me. So did the look on their faces when the doors closed behind the Tesla. It wasn't fear. It was confusion because they couldn't grasp a version of me that didn't need their approval to stand tall. Later that afternoon, I returned to the bedroom. The drawer where I kept the silver bracelet sat slightly ajar. I opened it slowly and lifted the chain into the light. It still caught the sun just right, sparkling with quiet significance. I turned it over in my palm, tracing the engraving with my thumb. You don't have to prove your worth. I whispered it this time, not for reassurance, but for remembrance, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. Then I placed it inside a small wooden box. Not out of anger, out of completion. That version of me, she's resting now. I've evolved beyond her need for validation. I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. 3 unread messages from Diane. Can we talk? From Victoria, you made your point. Hope it was worth it. And from Nathan, the new interns ask about you. Quiet but sharp. Don't ever doubt your impact. I replied to Nathan with one line, thank you for seeing me. The other 2? I left them unread. That wasn't spite. That was clarity. That was boundaries. I stepped out onto the porch just as a soft breeze rolled through, stirring the herbs in the hem of my linen shirt. The air smelled clean, like new beginnings without ceremony. I thought about all the people I'd tried to keep close out of duty, not joy. All the explanations I'd offered to people committed to misunderstanding me. The weight of those obligations now lifted from my shoulders. People think forgiveness means giving others another chance, I said aloud, to no one in particular, the words resonating in my heart. Sometimes forgiveness is giving yourself a new story without them in it. I stood a little taller, not because I was proud, but because I no longer felt small. And it was strange how silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned, deserved, powerful. It felt like home. The flowers I planted last year, tender, uncertain, were now blooming without permission. I smiled and thought maybe I am too. My phone buzzed again one last time. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. They looked regretful in the end, but I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving forward. Have you ever outgrown people who once made you feel small just by standing tall in silence? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if no one has told you this today, you don't need to prove your worth. You already have it. See you in the next story.